Hi, friends. So today I want to continue this conversation that Rachel has kind of started us on, thinking about how the weird responses people have when they find out what it is that we do for a living might help us think about some of the attitudes um, that people have towards experts and certain kinds of expertise. And and in doing so, I want to continue to explore this question that Andy raises about how we suss out expertise and like how we know what kind of expertise we need. Do we need, experiential expertise, what we might think of as kind of like street smarts, or do we need that kind of procedural expertise, like book smart? Or is it some combination of both? I want to begin by kind of walking through 3 or 4 examples along the lines of, kind of the example that Rachel raises, because I think these examples kind of help illustrate some of the problems we might encounter when we're trying to, as I said, like suss out expertise to understand what it is that someone is actually good at, and kind of what is the basis of their expertise. But then, also, how we make decisions about who we do and don't listen to. As Rachel mentioned, I've kind of done a lot of different things. I trained to be a professional ballet dancer, and I actually had some experience performing with a company professionally before I went to college. And when I was in college, I continued to dance and perform with the college dance company. And as I kind of aged into adulthood, I found myself sometimes in situations where when people found out that I was a dancer, and they would presume that I was a burlesque or a striptease dancer rather than, a ballet or a modern contemporary dancer. And, sort of explaining that, no, I don't do that, I do this other kind of thing, was just, sort of, it was an example of how this one word might have kind of a different valence in different social situations, different, for different people with different life experiences and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of one example, right? And then another example, I was a lawyer, and often people would respond to finding out that I was a lawyer by making a lawyer joke, right? Or, some kind of comment about, oh, Shakespeare thought that we should kill all the lawyers, kind of thing. And, and it was kind of an interesting situation when you think of it, that, this idea that people who, maybe had never met me before felt pretty comfortable making jokes or comments that kind of called the moral integrity of, what at that point was kind of my life's work into question. And shows like, this kind of how we have stereotypes that apply to some professions but not others. And lawyers are definitely in there, right? Like there are these people that we have to have, right? Like they help us navigate all kinds of tricky situations. But there's also this kind of suspicion, right, about whether or not they're really using their knowledge in the right way. The kind of third example that I want to talk about is when I actually left my job as a lawyer to go back to graduate school and get a PhD in literature. I often, when I would tell people I was in grad school to get a PhD, they would make some comment like, oh, a PhD in English, so what are you going to do with that? Which is, this, again, like, people who might have never met me before felt like just totally comfortable dismissing a whole area of and which again, I had at that point chosen to make my life's work. But as awkward as all of these, kind of social situations might have been in the moment, they all really kind of pale in comparison to the awkwardness that ensues when people now ask me, so what is it that you do? And I respond with some version of full-time unpaid domestic labor, because since 2018, just because I wanted to spend more time with my kids, I left full-time academic work. And really, like, I mean, I cannot sort of stress enough how in all kinds of social situations where, so what do you do, is an opening, gambit. The response to that question, I'm a stay-at-home mom, is just a total conversation killer. And I think there are all kinds of reasons for that. But some of them definitely have to do with just assumptions that people make about me when they find out that I am a stay-at-home mom. They make assumptions about my level of educational attainment, about my motivation, about my politics or lack thereof, about my relationship with my spouse or my kids. What I am trying to kind of illustrate here are, the problems that are inherent with using kind of what it is that someone does for a living as a kind of proxy for all kinds of things, right? To find out how smart are they, like what is their expertise, or that sort of idea that when we say you should trust the experts, this idea that it's really easy to figure out who the experts are, and that there are certain people who can just be discounted out of hand because, well, of what they do. And so while I am definitely, not advocating for the kind of environment we have currently where anyone can be an expert regardless of, what their experience or their credentials are, I do think there really is something, as Andy and Matt have both pointed out, there is something, to the contention that it's not always easy to figure out who the experts are. Also, I do think too we need to acknowledge that some of the kind of shortcuts that we've used historically are problematic and exclusionary for all kinds of reasons, because of classism and racism and sexism and ableism and ageism. These traditional shortcuts that we've used to kind of narrow the field and figure out who the experts are, they've never really worked very well. And in this particular moment, I'm thinking now of the Great Resignation and, this moment of where, people are always throwing up the semi-apocryphal barista with the PhD in philosophy. There is a kind of acknowledgement that people who might be experts in one thing might be doing something totally unexpected that is not necessarily indicative of their expertise. So, these shortcuts that never really worked very well in the first place are maybe even less reliable and useful now. And so, to kind of conclude and wrap this up, what I'd like to, sort of suggest is that, in some ways, I've really started to think this is why, this push for things, like diversity, equity, and inclusion are so vital and important for all kinds of reasons, obviously. But I think they can help this issue of expertise, sussing out the expertise and figuring out, kind of what kind of expertise we need and, what expertise is going to be useful in a given situation. Because I think to some extent when we're trying to create these more inclusive, discursive and professional communities, we're both trying to stop leaning on these really questionable shortcuts, right? While also developing maybe some new informational literacies that are potentially more useful. So anyway, that's all for this week. Bye, friends.